I'm taking a bit of a step backwards today. I haven't done this for some time, but I'm creating more of a beginner level video today. So if you're just starting, then I'm going to be showing today how to create an indicator in MetaTrader. This code is for MQL5, MetaTrader 5. I'm going to create a separate video for MQL4, MetaTrader 4. In the past, I have tried to mix the two in a single video, but I find that gets confusing. So this is the MetaTrader 5 version, and when I do release the MQL4 version, I'll add a link in this video so you can find it. But the indicator we're creating is not a complex indicator. It has a top line here, a bottom line, and then at specified distance in between, it has these other two lines to create more of a channel inside. This is simply tracking highs and lows of price. So you can see that this upper line tracks down as the price is tracking down, and the lower line goes down with it and then comes back up. So it's a simple channel, and it's going to be the basis of an expert advisor that we'll also get to very soon. But all of this code is aimed at beginner level to show you how to write the code for this very simple indicator. And it gives you an opportunity then to modify this and add your own features as you see fit. So enough of the description of this, let's get straight into the code and get you started. Now, although this is a beginner tutorial, I'm going to assume that you've already installed MetaTrader 5, and I have it on screen here. I'm just using the MetaQuotes demo server. Now, the MetaQuotes demo server is available for anyone to use, but it is obviously only a demo. You can't perform live trades. But if you want to test your work, you can run demonstrations here. But remember that the trades you're making are OTC or over-the-counter trades, which means that each broker has slightly different prices or can have slightly different prices. So if you're practicing on MetaQuotes demo, you might find that when you switch to a live broker, you get different prices. If you don't have a broker yet, then check out the description to this video. It has a list of several brokers there. Check out the brokers for yourself, make sure they're right for you. But if you do use one of those brokers using the link in the description here, then I get a small rebate and it just helps to fund the channel. So we have MetaTrader 5 installed. I'm going to go to the editor to create this indicator. Now I have here the toolbar, and you just click this IDE button to open the editor. If you don't have the toolbar, then you can either go to View Toolbars and turn it on, or you can just go to Tools, MetaQuotes Language Editor, or even just press F4. So now the editor is open, and I'm going to be creating an indicator. You can see here on the left-hand side that it's already broken up into experts, files, images, include, and indicators. If I expand that indicators, I have already created a folder here called Orchard. I recommend that if you're going to create your own indicators or experts, you create your own folder and put them all inside that. It avoids any possibility that the name you choose might conflict with a name of some other indicator or expert that you download, or even something that MetaQuotes may release in the future. So I've got this Orchard folder inside indicators already. If you don't already have one, you can just right click on indicators and create new folder. So I've got this, I click that, I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to create a new file. Now, because this is inside indicators, that new file will create a new indicator file. And over here, menu, it's a custom indicator. Yes. I click next, and now it wants a name. It's already got the path name in here so far, indicators/orchard. I'm going to call this triple channel D. Here's my standard copyright author message. Now, this will come by default with the name MetaQuotes in there, so you just change that to your own name, and it will remember that for next time. I've used this before, so it has remembered the name that I put in there before. And then a link to your website if you have one, which again will come by default with a link to MetaQuotes, but you can change that. There is an option here to add input parameters, but I never use that. I enter them directly in the code, so I'm just going to leave that blank. I click next. The event handlers you want for today on calculate is fine. So we'll just go next. And this indicator is on the chart. So you'll find that some indicators like an RSI or a MACD, for example, appear in a separate window below the chart. This indicator will be on the chart. So I'm not going to choose indicator in separate window and then finish. And now the editor has created this outline of the code that I need. Now, I particularly dislike the way these are laid out. and I'm just going to make some quick edit to just change the format of this. Now all I've done really, I've just cleaned it up. I put some blank space in here, removed the extra comments that they tend to put ahead of defunctions, and so it just looks a little cleaner. These first three properties, copyright, link, and version, when you load an indicator onto the chart, you'll be able to see those on the panel that pops up. There is one more thing that I'm going to add to this that they don't add by default when you use the template, and that's hash property description. And you can have multiple lines with hash property description. It'll appear as a multiple line description on your indicator. Indicator chart window, well, that came up when we were setting up the template, and you can actually change it from inside here, but I do want indicator chart window. So this says that this indicator will appear on the chart. Now I need to set some properties for the indicator. So if you remember from the view of this indicator, it has an upper line, a lower line, and then two lines in between that. So that represents 4 different buffers of values. And now a buffer is where I'm storing price information that goes across the chart. So each one of those lines, if you look at any of the candles on the chart, there is a value for that line. All those values are stored in these 4 different buffers, 4 buffers, 4 lines. Indicator plots is also set to 4 here. This shows how many of these buffers are going to appear on the chart. So I might have a buffer that just has some working values in it, and I don't want to show that on the chart. Then I might have indicator buffers 5, and the indicator plots would still be 4 because I'm only displaying the first 4 of those buffers on the chart. There are certain types of thing you can plot on the chart, like a candlestick, for example, that requires more than one buffer. Now, in that case, the plots will take up as many buffers as they need each, and they occupy those, or they take up those buffers in sequence. So if I had a plot that was a candlestick and I had indicator plots 1 here, it would be one plot, but it would take the first 4 buffers. In my case, I'm plotting simple lines, and one plot requires 1 buffer, so these are the same number. So now I'm adding some definition for each of these plots and buffers. And I do this with, again, hash property, indicator underscore label, and then 1. So the first buffer and first plot in this case has a label, and that label is just going to say upper. So this will be the top line. I'm giving it a color, and again, indicator underscore color 1. And I'm setting the color to yellow. There is a range of these colors, and you can also just use RGB numbers if you want to. I'm setting the style, and in this case it's a solid, and I'm setting the type, so I'm drawing a line, and that might be where you would say it's a candlestick, which would occupy multiple buffers for one plot and so on. But in my case, I'm drawing a line. And the width, which is just 1. You can set these when you load the indicator onto the chart as well. These are just the defaults that I'm setting here. Now the second line, or the second buffer and second plot, all the same properties, indicator underscore label, and now I'm just changing these to 2. And that's all we have to do to create more of these. So the label for this is going to be high. I'm changing the color to green. In this case, I'm making the style a dot. And it's still drawing a line, and the width is still 1. So we just need to repeat this for as many buffers as we have. And I've done that, so I've got indicator label 3 and 4. This is the low line, which is the inside lower line, and then the lower is the outside line at the bottom. So colors are green, orange, red, and so on. So now that I've created all of that definition, which shows how these lines are going to be displayed on the screen, I have some values that I want to capture from the user when they set up the indicator. I want to set a period, which is the number of candles that I'm going to look backwards to do the calculation. And you'll see how that gets used. And then I want to set the percentage that the upper line is away from, or the percentage that this high line is below the upper line, and also the percentage that the low line is above the lower line. And I get those values with the input statement. So just looking at the first one. Input statements begin with input. You might find some old code around that uses extern, and some people still use that. Extern and input are not the same. They are very similar, but there are some differences with extern, and I always use input. It's the newer syntax, so you should use that. The key difference you'll notice, and it's not the only difference, is that by using input, the value in this variable in the rest of the code cannot be changed. So it prevents accidental changing of that, where if you use extern, you actually can change that. I recommend not doing it. But the keywords here, input, this is an integer type, int, which means it can only store integer values. I'm calling it inp period. My default naming convention for inputs is to name them all with inp and then something to describe what I'm storing. I assign a default value to it, which in this case is 10. You can change that when you load the indicator on the chart, but it begins as a 10. And then the semicolon just to finish that statement. But then by adding this comment / period, when you see this, when you load the indicator, that will be the label attached to this value. So you can give better labels than simply this variable. If I didn't have that comment, then when you see that input on the chart, it would just say inp period. And sometimes these variable names make sense to you, but they're not very useful when you're trying to set the values when you load the indicator on the chart. So always finish with this / and a user-friendly name. Now, my next is, again, the input statement. This is a type double, which means it can store decimal values. I'm calling this one INP upper %, and this is the percentage that that high line is below the upper line. So I'm again setting a default value, and you'll notice here I've used 30.0. You could just enter 30 here, and it should work fine, but I just like to add this 0.0 when I'm defining a double, just for clarity. And again, the comment, which is what you'll see on the screen. And then the same thing for the lower %. And I'm making both of these by default the same, but obviously when you run it, you can set these to anything that you like. Just remember, with these values, that is the distance above the lower line, where I draw the low line, and this value is the distance below the upper line, where I draw the high line. And now, I said here that I have 4 buffers and 4 plots. I actually have to create some data arrays to store the values that are associated with those buffers. So these buffers are of type double, and my naming convention for global variables, now these are globals because they're defined outside these functions, is just to capitalize. And it's an array, and I create the array with these 2 brackets, and it's an array that doesn't have a fixed size, so I don't have a size inside these brackets. So I will, when I get down to the code here, actually associate that buffer with buffer number 1. So that will be the values that appear in this upper line. I'll just add in the other buffers here. So they're all the same: buffer high, buffer low, and buffer lower. This is just my naming convention for buffers. I call them buffer and then a name to describe which buffer they are, but they're all arrays of double. So next we'll look at the onInit function, and as it might sound, this is called when the indicator is first set up, when you first load it onto the chart, or if you go into the properties of the indicator and change any values, it will go back to this onInit and set everything up. And this is where I actually associate these buffers with the buffer numbers. So to associate the upper buffer, or buffer upper, with buffer number 1, so the first thing I would do is call this set index buffer. Now this number 0 actually aligns to buffer 1. There is a mismatch in these numbers. 0 becomes 1, and you'll find that all of the others are also out by 1. So set index buffer 0, I'm assigning buffer upper, and I'm saying that this indicator or this buffer contains indicator data. After that, I want to actually look at this buffer in reverse order. So by default, as I defined this, when you look at a chart, the rightmost candle is typically candle number 0, and the candle to the left of that is 1 and 2. And you'll find a lot of functions that refer to the candles in that order. But by default, this buffer would be in the opposite order, and element number 0 of this buffer would be the very leftmost candle on the chart, which is way off to the left and you don't see it. And then some other number, which would be the number of candles, is buffer number X, which would show up as the rightmost candle. But you can reverse that, and I do that so that the numbers remain consistent. This is not something you'll often see in the examples provided by Metadata. They don't do that. I just like to do it to keep everything consistent. And the statement to do that is array set as series. It doesn't actually change the way the data is stored in the buffer. but it does change the way that you access it. So I'm saying that for buffer upper, it is a series and set that to true. If you want to remove that, you can call the same function again and set to false. So all I'm going to do now is duplicate these two statements for the other three buffers. So exactly the same statement, I'm just changing the buffer names, and of course the values are incrementing by 1 with each. Now there are a lot more things that could be done in here, but this is a very simple indicator and I don't want to confuse it too much, so that's everything that we need in the onInit function. And in the end it returns this init succeeded. Nothing's gone wrong in here, nothing can go wrong, so that will be init succeeded. If somewhere in the onInit we have a failure, then there are other codes that can be returned that will mean that the indicator just doesn't run. So that takes care of setting up the indicator, but now we actually have to calculate values and put them into these buffers to display the lines on the chart. And all of that happens in the onCalculate function. This is called by MetaTrader or by the terminal every time something happens that can affect what's on the chart. So every time there's a new price, every time a new candle opens up or candle closes and so on. So this will be called many, many times. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add this statement. If is stopped. This is a system function and it basically says that if this indicator has been told to stop, then it will just return 0 and it gets out before I do any processing. For this simple indicator, it wouldn't matter too much if I didn't do that because there isn't a lot of processing, but some indicators have some very complex work that goes on and they can take some time. So it's a good idea to have this statement at the beginning and exit as soon as we know that this indicator is meant to stop. Now, when I set the input here, this INP period, this is how many candles I need to be able to actually calculate a value. In most cases, you're always going to have more than 10. But if you've maybe opened up something for the first time and don't have enough candles, or if you've set that to a very high number, then I really can't do any calculation in here. So I'm just going to put in a quick check, which says if rates underscore total is less than that period, then return 0. Now rates underscore total is this value that's been passed in by the terminal, and it tells me how many total candles there are available on the chart. So if rates total is less than the number that I need, I can't do anything, and then I just return, and I return 0. The value that I return from this function is the same value that is going to come back next time this function is called in this prev underscore calculated. So what I'm saying is when this is called the next time, it will come in with rates total, which is the total number of candles available, and it will say that I have processed none of them. And this is used so that we don't constantly go back and reprocess everything. By having that prev calculated, we know how many candles need to be recalculated to keep the indicator up to date, and all the rest of the values simply don't change. So now in practice, how do I use that information? I'm going to create a working variable here. It's an integer, and I'm going to call that count. And this is going to tell me how many candles I need to recalculate in this indicator. So it says if prev calculated is greater than rates total or prev calculated is less than 0. So this first statement, if, and then I have a condition. Conditions are always inside parentheses. And the first part of the condition is prev calculated greater than rates total. That would be a very rare thing, but it is possible to change the number of candles on a chart. And if you do that, it's possible that the last time this function was called, prev calculated was actually a bigger number than the total of the total number of candles available now. So you have a possible error there. This other condition, prev calculated less than 0, I don't actually think that can happen, but I'm just being very careful here and saying that if prev calculated is less than 0, and this double line, that's an or statement. So I'm saying if this or this, and then I end that if statement with a bracket. Now that bracket means that I've got a block of code coming that will all be executed if this is true. In this case, my block of code is one line. Then I set count equal to rates total. So effectively, if either of these conditions happen, and they're very unusual, then I just set count to rates total, which means I'm going to recalculate everything from the beginning. And that bracket closes this block of code. If this is not true, then I go to the else statement and again open a block of code. But in this case, count is equal to rates total minus prev calculated. So I'm saying I previously calculated some. This is how many there are in total. I only need to calculate the difference between these two. But then I have this second line of code, and you'll notice here I don't have an opening bracket for a block of code. If I simply have one statement to execute after an if, I can just put it there and that will be executed. What this is saying, if prev calculated is greater than 0, that means I've been through this once before, and I'm going to just add 1 to the count with this plus plus. Count plus plus will add 1 to the value in count, which means that I'm always going to recalculate the bar that I previously calculated. And that's because the current bar is constantly getting new prices, and the value that I calculated for it last time might be a different value that I would calculate this time. So you'll often see on charts that the very end of an indicator is just fluctuating as the price goes up and down. So that's what this is doing. It also has the effect that when a new bar opens, it makes me go back and recalculate the one that's just closed one final time. So after all of that, this variable count tells me exactly how many bars, beginning with the most recent, I need to recalculate. So now I'm going to step through those bars, beginning with the one furthest to the left, which, remember, the bar on the right, I'm calling bar number 0, so I'm starting with the highest numbered bar. And to step through them, I use this for loop, so for, and then parentheses begins the conditions. It starts out with int I equals count minus 1. So I'm creating a working variable to use inside this loop called I. It's an integer. And I'm initializing that to count minus 1. I'm going to repeat this loop as long as I is greater than or equal to 0 and not is stopped. So that's the same thing we had up here. I'm just adding it there in case for some reason this gets stopped in the middle of the loop and I want to exit straight away. And I minus minus means that at the end of each loop, I'm going to reduce I by 1. So now let's start by setting the value in the upper buffer. So this is not the complete statement yet, but there is a function called iHighest, which returns the bar number of the bar that is the highest value for the given symbol. Symbol bracket bracket is the chart symbol for the given time frame, and period bracket bracket is the current chart time frame. For a specified price, and mode high is the high price, over a given number of bars, which is INP period that we set the inputs, beginning with bar number I in this case. So as I step through all the bars, I'm looking for the highest bar, beginning with bar number I, going back INP period. So I'm looking for high values here, using the mode underscore high price. That gives me the bar number. I actually want the price from that bar. So this function, and I said earlier, I reverse the arrays because there are a number of inbuilt functions that assume bar number 0 is on the right. This is one of them. When this returns a number, it's counting with 0 on the bar on the right and then counting upwards. So when I say beginning at bar number I for this period, if I was, say, bar number 10 and INP period is 10, it's going to look from 10 up to 19. But now to get the value of that bar, I need a different function, which is iHigh. So just take that out for a moment. That's the value that we used to get the number of the bar. When you supply that number to this iHigh function, again with the symbol and period, then it gives the high price for that symbol, that time frame, this bar number. So now I have that. What I want to do though is assign that into the buffer. So this will now find the high price for the highest bar for INP period bars beginning with bar number I, and it will assign that price to buffer upper position I. And now I can do the same thing for the lower buffer. In this case, I'm assigning it to buffer lower, still bar number I, and I'm using I low to get the low price for the symbol period, and I lowest to get the bar with the lowest price. Same things here, but I'm using mode low because I'm looking at the low price. So after this, I have values in the upper and lower. What I need to do now is calculate the low and the high, which are those two inner lines. So first I'm just calculating this delta, the difference between the upper buffer and the lower buffer. So then the buffer low, it's from the lower buffer, and I'm calculating a price that is delta multiplied by the lower percent, and because this is a percent, I'm then dividing by 100. So where my default is 30%, this will calculate 30% of this difference, this delta, and add that to the lower buffer. And that's where the buffer low value will be set. And then the high is just the same thing. In this case, though, it's beginning with the upper buffer and subtracting that delta multiplied by the upper percent divided by 100. So all of that simply puts values into these buffers, and that's all I need to do to draw those values on the chart. Once a value goes into that buffer, because I've already assigned that buffer to a plot on the chart, it simply gets drawn. So that's all of the calculation I need to do. And then finally, I return rates total. Rates total, as I said, is the number of total bars there are. This loop will have gone through every bar. All I'm really saying is I've now calculated everything. And the next time this function is called, any value that I return from this function comes back in this pref calculated. And I mentioned that earlier. So that I know next time this comes through that I've already calculated everything, and that's where these calculations of the number of bars that I need to recount come in. That should be everything. Let me just try compiling that. So compile with here. There are no errors showing, so that should be ready to go. We can now go back to the chart and try running this and just see what happens. So now back on the MetaQuotes terminal, if I look at indicators, I can see here my orchard folder. There's the triple channel D. I drag that onto the chart. Now, first you see common. These are the properties that we set inside that code. It's called triple channel D. The version number 1.00 is the copyright statement. And here is the description that I added. It's not very useful description, but that's the description. And you can see this copyright has a hyperlink here, and that's the property link that we set up. I'll skip the inputs for now and go to the colors. All of those values that we set in the property indicator 1 to 4 show up here. So there's the label upper, high, low, and lower. The colors, yellow, green, orange, and red, they're all width 1. The upper and lower I got as a solid line, and the two middle lines are both dotted lines. So you can change those values here. The inputs, period, and remember these are showing the comments that I had in the input statement. So period, upper band percent, lower band percent, period of 10, upper and lower bands are both 30. So if we just go OK, and this has done the calculation. So the lower band, the upper band, and the two in the middle. Let me just change the inputs. If I right click on the chart here, select the indicator list, triple channel D, I'm going to move the upper band to 50. And now the upper band is much lower, it's at 50%. The lower band's still at 30%. Now a popular value that you might use, I'm using 30 as the default here, but some people might prefer to actually make this 33 and make it actually a third, or you might want to use Fibonacci numbers. That's up to you. But this indicator will now be the basis of the next step, which is to create an expert advisor that trades based on price moving across the inner lines in this indicator. As I said, this is the MetaTrader 5 version. I will be covering a MetaTrader 4 version next, and then I'll move on to the expert advisors. If this has been some use to you, then please click the like button because that helps me to get more views and helps to fund the channel. And if you want to see the next video, then click subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when the next video is released. Thank you for watching.